Well, welcome back. Now we're going to talk about vision, right? And we're in this diagram right now on that left side, and we're going to dial in on that last competency we talked about in lesson 1. And the key takeaway here is that we have to have a clear, compelling vision to be a strong leader. Now, this is true in leadership overall, but it's particularly important for sustainability as opposed to leadership in other areas. And this is kind of the last part that we'll be doing that's really internally focused on the skill side. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the video that you saw from Dr. Spiller and a little bit about the reading from Dana Meadows. In the video from Dr. Spiller, she talked about navigating from darkness to light. And I think that's a really powerful analogy. Right? That's the leadership journey that we're taking. In fact, if we think about Module 1, that was kind of the darkness part. Like, it was how we have such strong, wicked problems. The journey to light is what Dr. Spiller was focused in on with her concept of rangatira. And that is the need to blow up this power of one and to weave a group together. And I think she talked beautifully about how there's tension and there's balance in actually taking a solo activity and utilizing all the parts and weaving them together, literally weaving together a group. In some ways, this is the definition of leadership, right? Taking individuals and weaving them into a group. It's also how ecosystems work. And it's about utilizing all the parts. Her other concept that I think I really wanted to draw out and highlight for you was this concept of mana, of releasing the power of others. And this comes from a place of deep humility. We talked about that as one of the competencies in Lesson 1, and she gave some examples of that. And it's about commitment to people and purpose. One thing I want to note and pull out is that this is not something that is positional or hierarchical. It's not saying that the leader is the center of gravity. It's not the power of one. It's actually about relationships, and that's where we're headed in Module 3. And it's often somebody who's actually very quiet. I want to kind of disavow us of the notion that the sustainability leader is always the sage on the stage, for example. It's often the guide on the side. And what you heard from Dr. Spiller is a beautiful example of that. Now, she also cautioned, as you see in this diagram, against assumed mana. That means that as you get more successful, right, you sort of take this air on of sometimes arrogance. And it's easy to kind of pick that up as you pick up more and more leadership positions, accolades, external power on that. But her point, which I fully align with, is that the true leadership comes from being humble, being generous, and having deep wisdom. And sometimes it comes from not speaking. This is systems thinking of the highest order, if we go back to the lecture that we talked around this. And finally, she talked about this concept of being calm as the world around you rotates, or being still while the world flies past you. And this beautiful example of Polynesian explorers. And it's kind of as the going gets tough, the tough get quiet. And I think this is another key principle of sustainability leadership. I'll give you an example from my own work. I was responsible for overseeing what was really intended to be an incredibly powerful ceremony of indigenous leaders who were harvesting maple sap from the inner city of Detroit, Michigan, near where I live, for the first time in generations. They were doing this in the first time that the maple sap ran, which is in March. And they were in this ceremony in the woods within the city, and police came in and broke this up, and actually in a violent manner. And you know, my first reactions, and I was not present. This was indigenous leaders only. I was not present, but my questions initially started with, oh my gosh, did we have the right permits? What were the details of this? Who initiated what? But one of my guides, an indigenous leader within the organization, actually literally said, we need to step back and think more deeply about this. What was our goal? Who were the people? What was the right way to treat the people there? Whose land was this? And of course, it's indigenous land that had been stolen over time, and in this case, deeded to the city of Detroit. And that set a very different frame in what was a storm. It was a media storm. There were all these different things happening. But kind of that step back and that indigenous knowledge and leadership is what I needed in that place. That's sort of an extreme example of this, but this happens constantly in that sort of stepping back, that calm and grounding that Dr. Spiller reminded us of. Now, I want to take you through a little bit of another of my favorite authors. This is Daniela Meadows, and you read her piece on visioning. Now, it's interesting because it's complementary yet somewhat contrasting to what you heard from Dr. Spiller, because what Dana Meadows says is if we don't know where we want to go, it makes little difference if we make great progress. What you heard from Dr. Spiller was more of a go out and explore, and the sea will come to us, the island will come to us. I think these things overlap in a very interesting way, and that is that we have to take the time and space for exploration. I mean that literally and figuratively and sort of internally. And what Daniela Meadows' piece talks about is why does a sustainable world often seem so bleak, right? Can we pivot from talking about bad trends and actually talk about what a vision is for a sustainable world that we actually want to live in? Can we move past the gloom and doom? And can we actually build a sustainable vision together? And she argues this comes from values, not logic. There may be some motivation in escaping doom, but there's actually even more in creating a better world. And that's what true sustainability leaders do. And you have to put down some of your inhibitions to work on vision, right? And as she points out in her piece, you sometimes feel childish. She talked about ending world hunger and actually putting that out there and say everybody deserves to have enough food to eat. It's a beautiful way of putting it. In some ways, it seems simple and childish, as she puts it. And so we have to kind of unlearn some of those things. And one example that I've seen, and we'll return to an example of clean energy that we've talked about a few times, where I think this has gone much better for the environmental movement compared to the piece that Daniela Meadows read some time ago, is putting out a vision of what it looks like to power our society with clean energy, to move away from coal, to move away from natural gas, move away from polluting sources, and to have a society that's powered by renewable sources, which are clean, which are quiet, which function better. Electric vehicles powered by renewable energy, for example, can make our cities quieter and more pleasant places to be. So that vision, it's taken a long time coming. There's a huge amount of pushback, but those are the sorts of things that we're talking about. And you're going to practice this as part of your workbook and part of your personal sustainability plan. Now, there's some guidelines to what makes a vision effective, right? First, it's got to be shared. A vision that is just your own isn't going to go anywhere, obviously. It can't be just for you. It's got to be something that you have the courage to share and that you feel like you can build up momentum behind. It's got to be desirable, right? Looking towards a better future. Again, people don't want to live in an austere environment. And there are ways of doing this and being sustainable. It doesn't mean using more. You can use less and still have a desirable outcome. But it's got to look positive in that way. It's got to be imaginable. People have to sense this, close their eyes and see it. And you'll do some of your own visioning on this. But people have to understand what it is. Personify. People have to know what they do in it. People have to be able to see you, and others have to be able to see your place in it. And it has to be communicated. If no one knows about it, it doesn't really exist. It has to be able to be communicated in multiple platforms. And finally, it needs to be flexible, right? And this kind of comes back to humility. If we knew it all, why even have a vision on this? And what you see in front of you is the iceberg model of this. One of the things to know when you're building a vision is current events are just the tip of the iceberg. The things that we can see above the surface are just the tip of the iceberg. We have to be thinking in systems. We have to be thinking about what are some of the causes and consequences and what's our vision to make things more effective. Again, an example from my own work. I've worked a lot on restoring the Great Lakes, the largest surface freshwater ecosystem in the world. And we've actually taken a whole new approach and built a collective vision of what it means to have a restored Great Lakes, what it means to have communities living lakeside with a resource that's an asset, not something to stay away from because it's been so polluted over time, what it means to build equity and justice into restoration. And we didn't just say collectively, I have this idea, now everybody follow me. No, it's not that easy. And an entire coalition of organizations within government, outside, private, public, etc., helping to build collectively what are the things that we care about. Why do we want to see these lakes restored? So that in the end, we have a shared collective vision that's better than where we are today. It's desirable. People can see it. People can sense it. People can feel it. And people are motivated to move towards it. That's what makes vision effective on this. So what you'll be doing is an exercise just to get your thoughts flowing, right? And I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and think about the year 2040. And think about like what's happening, and think about the world that's on a far more sustainable, equitable trajectory in 2040. What's happening in this world? Who lives near you? How do you interrelate? What changes in this world and what stays the same? What are people's lives like? How are people collaborating and working together? How are people harmonizing their activities with nature? How is the economy successful? What are people doing? The vision should be judged by the clarity of its values, not the clarity of its implementation path. The best visions are almost never clear at first how you get there. That's part of the visioning process on here. Now, I want you to think and close your eyes again and try and see what's happening now. Think about the current reality. The time is now, and there's barriers between your vision and this current reality. What are the most powerful trends and forces? Who are the key groups? How are they working or not working together? What are we not being honest about? What don't we understand that we need to understand? Again, thinking about this current reality versus this vision. And that's where we build this creative tension, right? So the creative tension is between the vision and the current reality. And it's often described as flexing like a rubber band. This concept of creative tension was probably proposed most famously by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. What he talked about was this creative tension between where we are now, and he's talking about in the social justice movement, and what the vision was for true justice. You have to have this constructive way of actually fostering this tension like a rubber band that's stretched. That's how you help create this change, and that's what helps drive leadership. Now, when you look at Dana Meadows' piece going back through this, I want to be clear. We've been talking high-level vision, pie in the sky, and we're doing that intentionally. But of course, having a vision isn't enough. It's only the first step towards any goal. Without proper information, without models, without implementation, it's not going to go anywhere. But the point that I've been making here and that we're hearing in many of these pieces is we often skip this first step of visioning and go right to the constraints or right to the modeling or right to the information. I don't want to minimize the fact that when you have this big gap between your vision and current reality, there are many, many steps, many, many difficulties to get there in between. But I do want you to practice being creative in your vision, to put that in. Now, how does this all fit in? I want to go back to the concept that we started this course with, and that is sustainability leadership as this bridging concept of leadership overall. And where does vision fit in? The best way I can describe it is at the very top of this chart as the bridge. It's kind of the key part. To reach this pinnacle of sustainability leadership, we have to build shared long-term vision that has roots in ecology, that has roots in systems thinking, and that is informed by relationships. That is the pathway to get to this pinnacle that we're going to keep talking about in different ways, kind of on the theoretical side and others. But vision is that bridging concept. And I want to close by bringing us back to the organizational flow from this for the course. as we wrap up, this is kind of our wrapping up on what's the left side of this diagram, on the individual side. We've talked about values, we've talked about vision. You're going to be doing exercises where you actually help develop this vision as part of your sustainability leadership plan. In Module 3, which is going to focus on power and relationships, so kind of that top right quadrant. Because to implement vision, it obviously takes other people, right? It obviously takes working with others in these one-to-one relationships, and power and other dynamics impact those directly. So that's where we're headed next.